Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're going to talk about the secret language of our clothes. I mean, think about it. Every day we choose what to wear, but what are we really saying when we do that? We're going to try and decode this whole thing using one of the most wild and revolutionary decades in fashion history as our case study, the 1970s. So let's just jump right in. I want you to take a second and think about what you're wearing right now. You probably picked it because, I don't know, it's comfy or it's what you wear to work, or maybe it was just the first thing you grabbed. But what if that outfit is actually sending out all these signals about who you are, what you believe in, and where you fit in the world? That's the big question we're going to tackle. Now, to figure this out, we need a special kind of lens. And today, our lens comes from sociology. It's a bit of a mouthful. It's called symbolic interactionism. I know it sounds super academic, right? But the idea is actually pretty simple. It just means that we as people create shared meanings for things through our day-to-day interactions. And we use symbols to show off those meanings. And one of the most obvious, most powerful symbols we use every single day, it's our clothes. This quote just nails it, doesn't it? Fashion isn't just some frivolous thing, it's a language. It's how we tell the world who we are, or maybe who we want to be. And just like any language, it helps us find our people, It creates that feeling of connection. So, with that idea in our back pocket, let's jump in our time machine. All right, let's go back to the 1970s. And this wasn't just a time of bell-bottoms and disco balls. It was a decade of massive social change. And you better believe fashion was right there in the middle of it all, reflecting every single contradiction. The old rulebook for how people were supposed to dress, yeah, that got torn up and thrown right out the window. And you know what a huge driver of this was? Technology. Seriously, the invention of new synthetic fabrics, especially polyester, changed the whole game. All of a sudden, fashion wasn't just for the super rich buying designer clothes. Ready-to-wear stuff became cheap and available to pretty much everyone. Style was democratized, which meant way more people could use their clothes to say something about themselves. And oh boy, did they have a lot to say. See, the 70s wasn't about just one look. It was this incredible mashup of totally different styles all happening at the same time. You still had that earthy, handmade hippie vibe left over from the 60s, but then bam! You also had the slinky, shiny, glamorous disco scene. You had these romantic, old-timey prairie dresses, and at the exact same time, you had the ripped-up, safety-pinned anarchy of punk trying to burn it all down. It was just a beautiful, chaotic mess. Now, this looking to the past thing wasn't always so romantic. Sometimes it was explosive. Take Yves Saint Laurent's 1971 collection. He was inspired by the 1940s, but for people who had actually lived through World War II in Paris, it did not go over well. The styles brought back really painful memories, and critics just ripped it apart, saying it reminded them of wartime prostitutes. It was a massive scandal, and it just proves how deeply our clothes are tied to our collective memories. And of course, all these changes weren't happening in some fashion bubble. They were totally linked to the women's liberation movement. As women were flooding into the workplace and fighting for more freedom, their clothes changed to reflect that. The wrap dress was a game changer. It was professional, but also comfortable and freeing, and it was marketed directly to this new, empowered woman. And then you have the legendary Annie Hall look. It made wearing men's clothes, the ties, the vests, so chic. It was a statement. It was about claiming space and power in a man's world. Okay, so as we move through the decade, another huge shift starts to happen. One that, honestly, has probably had the biggest impact on how we all dress today. The focus starts shifting away from structured, formal stuff and towards something new: comfort, fitness, and ease. You know that whole thing where we wear workout clothes everywhere, even when we're not working out? Well, this is basically where it all started. The jogging craze hit America, and suddenly, athletic clothes started creeping out of the gym and onto the streets. Designers began using things like sweatshirt material and putting leotards into their collections. This was the birth of sportswear as everyday fashion, a trend that would absolutely define the 80s, but its seeds were planted right here. And it's funny, this recent comment from a Reddit thread just sums it up perfectly. It was about one garment in particular that became the icon of this new casual style, the tracksuit. It was comfy, it looked modern, and as this person points out, it kind of never left. But here's where the story takes a really fascinating and sometimes much darker turn. As the tracksuit started to spread around the world, this simple piece of athletic gear became something else entirely. It became a uniform and a really powerful symbol for a whole new generation. And what's just wild is how this happened. We're talking long before the internet could make a trend go viral. In all these different countries, working-class kids on the fringes of society all kind of independently adopted the tracksuit. In France, they were the Recall. In Russia, the famous Gopniks and their Adidas. In the UK, they were called Chavs. And in Australia, Lads or Esches. The specific brands changed a little, but the uniform and what it stood for was remarkably similar. So why the tracksuit? Well, part of it was grimly practical. A lot of these young people were struggling economically, pushed into petty crime. And the baggy fit of a tracksuit was, well, great for shoplifting or even for hiding a weapon. In fact, in 1990 Serbia, there was this famous gangster called Kanel who perfected a way of tucking his jacket into his pants to create a chute. So a gun in his waistband would slide right down to his ankle if he had to ditch it while running from the cops. This link between tracksuits, hoodies, and crime got so ingrained in the public's mind that it reached the highest levels of politics. I mean, check out this quote from David Cameron, years before he was prime minister. He literally called them the uniform of a rebel army. That's how loaded this simple piece of clothing had become. It wasn't just sportswear anymore. It was a threat. But let's dig a little deeper, back to that whole symbolic idea. What does sportswear mean? It's connected to sports, right? To athletes? And that world is all about traditional ideas of masculinity, power, competition, physical strength. So for young guys who felt totally powerless and looked down on by society, putting on a tracksuit was a way to borrow some of that power. It was a way to project an image of toughness and strength. So the key thing to get here is that this story doesn't just stop in the 90s. Not even close. In fact, that whole movement, sportswear becoming casual wear, and then being adopted by these subcultures, it directly set the stage for what is arguably the most dominant fashion force of the 21st century. And that force is, of course, streetwear. It bubbled up from the hip-hop scenes in New York and surf culture out in California, and it basically took all the ingredients we've been talking about, the sportswear, the DIY vibe from punk, the comfort of skate culture, and threw them all in a blender to create something totally new. This was fashion that came from the street up, not the runway down. And more recently, that has evolved into what people call hype beast culture. This is where streetwear meets full-on consumerism. The focus isn't just on the style anymore, it's about exclusivity. It's all about getting your hands on those limited edition drops from brands like Supreme. The value is in the rarity, the logo, and the status that comes with having it. It's amazing you can literally draw a straight line through the decades. It starts in the 70s, with sportswear becoming okay for every day, then the 80s, when hip-hop legends like Run DMC make the Adidas tracksuit an iconic look. By the 90s, streetwear is its own thing. And then, by the 2010s, the cycle is complete, when high-fashion brands like Louis Vuitton are collaborating with those same streetwear labels and putting hoodies on the runways in Paris. Which brings us right back to today. We've seen how one piece of clothing, the tracksuit, can tell this incredible story of social change and identity. So it really makes you think, what's our uniform today? Is it the athleisure wear of the wellness world? The carefully thrifted look of Gen Z? Whatever it is, what messages are our clothes sending about who we are right now? The language of fashion is always speaking. We just have to learn how to listen. Thanks so much for joining me.